But thank you so much for welcoming me here. Mang has invited me quite a few times before, but because it has clashed with our own church service, I haven't been able to come. But now, Zoom, there is no excuse. I just left our own service a little bit early to join you here and have enjoyed being with you. I also want to say that today is very easy for me because I'm going to speak about something that is very close to my heart. And not only that, but Dr. Lamboy, who is a guest today, I think, he was the one who wrote the sermon. So I'm going to use the Eco Sunday service sheet that was prepared by Eficor, and Dr. Lamboy was our sermon writer. Of course, I will add thoughts of my own. I also want to acknowledge the singer who sang so well that song called Renew Our World. And I'm so glad that it is the first translation in India, and it is in your language. So congratulations. I wish that the network was a bit better so that we could hear the words properly, but I'm sure it'll be on YouTube or something and we can see it much better. But thank you so much for that. I was really hoping that we would do it in Mizo, but I congratulate you that you have taken this far ahead. So I will be sharing my screen and sharing my thoughts today on what we as EFICO have prepared and what you have called Environment Sunday. And so the theme, as you know, is living in peace with nature. And the chosen verse is Genesis 6:19, keep them alive with thee. Now, this verse was already read in your language, but I'm going to read it again. The chosen verses for today's meditation is Genesis 6, verses 17 through to 21. And this is from the story of Noah. You know, in the Old Testament, there are so many rich stories. The Bible is full of so many rich stories. And sometimes we think that these stories are for Sunday school. You know, if you are like my church, we think, teach the children. It's Sunday school story. Nothing big can come out of it. Teach the children, make them color the rainbow, the animals, and that's it. But no, in these stories and the incidents in scripture, there are so many things that we can learn about who God is and what he wants his people to do. And the story of Noah is one such story that is full of a reflection of who God is. And we know the story, we know the sinfulness of the people. And at that time, God is upset with what is happening in the world. He is upset, he's angry because people are disobedient and are full in sin. And God even regretted, he felt sorry that he made human beings. Can you imagine that? Where God is so happy with all of his creation that after he created human beings on the sixth day, he looked back at Adam and Eve and all of the creation he had made, and he said, it is very good. But when we come to the story of Noah, here is God, just 5 chapters later, regretting that he had created human beings. And in Genesis 6:17 to 21, this is what God says, I am going to bring flood waters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. The creator who made all life is saying, I'm going to destroy everything. Every creature that has the breath of life in it, everything on earth will perish. Everything will go. But he says, I will establish my covenant with you, that is to Noah, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. Okay, so here's God establishing a covenant with his people to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. And if you go into chapter 7, it talks about 7 of the clean animals. So why did the flood happen, and what did God ask Noah to do? As I was saying, the flood happened. God was so happy with all of his creation. 5 chapters later in Genesis 6 is so angry that he regrets making human beings and wants to destroy everything because of their sinfulness, because of human disobedience and sinfulness. God, said he's going to destroy everything through the flood. God regretted making human beings, and his plan was to punish and restart with Noah's family, who were righteous and blameless. But the interesting thing, if you look at scripture, is God's plan to save Noah and his family included not just saving the human beings, but other things as well. What do we see? God had a covenant with his people. And here, God tells Noah to take 2 of each animal and 7 of each animal, and not just that, other things as well. So what are we going to see in this? The first point is that when looking after, in God's mission, we are participants in God's mission. The main point in this covenant in Genesis 6, God's covenant, he says, this is the covenant I make with you. What is it? The preservation of animals and all other living creatures from extinction. Noah's family and all living creatures. And what is the need? The need is to keep them alive. God's mandate and covenant was to keep them alive. So to participate in God's mission for creation care, Noah had to do 2 important things. Okay, we forget the second one, but the first one is to bring a couple each of all animals, birds and other living creatures into the ark. Now, God wanted 2 of each so that they could procreate, so that they could increase in number, so that they could reproduce later on. Now, the Bible does not seem to suggest that Noah had to go around selecting, running around and, let me choose this one, let me choose that one. But Noah was only facilitating the order and the command of God. And while participating in God's mission for creation care, Noah did not presume to be the owner of the mission. He didn't say, this is my mission. But he knew that the mission belongs to God, and we are privileged participants in what God is doing around us. I'm sure God could have used his power and saved all these animals himself. He could have taken care of what he had created. He was the creator. He created everything. So there is no reason why he couldn't save all of it. But he included human beings to be participants in his mission of preserving all these living creatures. A little bit different from how we treat God's world. Just think about it. God is allowing human beings to participate in his mission of preserving, of keeping living creatures alive and from keeping them from extinction. But what are we doing today? We will look at that later. That's the first thing. The other thing is providing for other living creatures. So the first one was to preserve all those animals, 2 by 2 and 7 by 7 for some animals, so that they could reproduce. And what is the second important thing? The second important thing that God had to do was to provide sufficient food for the living creatures in the ark. We forget this bit. Even when we teach it to Sunday school, we tell them, God said, bring 2 by 2, and we sing songs, the animals came in 2 by 2, hurrah, hurrah, we sing those songs. But we never think about the logistics, about the food. But God was very clear. He said, you bring enough food for yourself and for all the living creatures. So what was Noah's job here? His job was to identify different kinds of food for each living creature and the amount that would be sufficient for the whole period of the flood and the preservation of them in the ark. This is so interesting that has been brought out in this sermon. That human beings are also given the responsibility of providing here, of making sure there is enough so that all the creatures survive. So for Noah to keep all the living creatures alive with him in the ark, he has to do careful research. I don't know what a gecko eats. I don't know what this little buzzy thing eats. I don't know what that big animal eats. Noah probably had to do a lot of research. And then to do that, to bring all that food. And it reminds us of the fact that we too have to know the needs of creation, make plans and carry out those plans carefully. Do you know what food animals eat? Or we are only interested in eating those animals? Many times I'm only interested in eating them. I'm not interested in how you eat them. In my culture, we keep pigs. We keep a lot of pigs. My grandmother used to keep pigs. Now my aunt keeps pigs. And we are interested in what the pig will eat. So that it becomes fat for us to eat, when it's time to kill the pig. Or we know what a chicken will eat. But do you know what kinds of things, what kinds of food all these living creatures need? Perhaps not. But if you look at our ancestors, your ancestors and my ancestors, they lived in harmony with the rest of nature. with the rest of creation. And I'm sure it was never an alien concept to them what these animals needed to eat, to survive, to thrive, to grow. Unfortunately, you and I sitting here in Delhi or wherever you are have forgotten all of this. But this was God's mandate. First, to preserve, and second, to feed. And so even in our missional community where we are, as KWS or the Delhi Mizo Church, wherever we are, we have to use our intellect, our heart, our emotions, and our strengths so that we can provide for the rest of God's living creatures. Most of our intellect, our heart, emotion, and strength we spend to feed ourselves and to kill those animals. But here God is inviting us to be part of that journey, to preserve and to provide for other living creatures, which is so evident in the story of Noah. The third is to protect other living creatures. Now, keeping the living creatures alive is also about ensuring the total well-being of nature. It not only involves the need for food, but also the importance of protection from harms and dangers, both from within and outside. Imagine the greatness of variety of living creatures in the ark, the amount of planning and care needed to preserve them, and the patience required to deal with each living creature. When you talk about the ark, it's a very nice picture. All those animals are happily there. One giraffe will be there, elephant will be there in our pictures. Can you imagine all those animals? The tiger, the deer, a little rabbit hopping around, a dog, a cat, cheetah, hyena, whatever those animals, all living in one boat. And how much it would take to protect those animals, how much you have to ensure that the tiger lives in one area, the lion lives in another area, the rhinoceros in one area. Just imagine all that planning. But God entrusted that responsibility to protect other living creatures to Noah as well. Today, most of the time, we seem to be destroying and not protecting. I was reminded when we were in Northeast India, Mang and other colleagues, we were in Northeast India doing a creation care workshop. And we had to write, what do our churches do to destroy the environment? And one of the biggest things that came was whenever we have our church conventions, what do? We have a big church convention, okay, KWS or KBC or whatever. We're having a big gathering. There is not a hall big enough, a church big enough to hold us. What do? We cut forests. We chop trees so that we can make a pandal. Instead of protecting the home of other living creatures, we sometimes destroy it. Now, last year, I was staying in Vasant Kunj, in somebody's flat for a little while. I was there for 2-3 months. And every morning, I used to take a walk in the park. There's a lovely park out there in Sector A. And, maybe some of you live in Vasant Kunj. And I used to walk around there every morning for about an hour. In Vasant Kunj, they always have water problems. So early in the morning, I had to get up at 6:30 to pump the water. By 7:30 is full. By 7:30, I go and take a walk in the park. Now, about a month into my walk, and I'm feeling very fit and strong, the monkeys in the park bit me. They surrounded me. One monkey came, jumped, lots of other monkeys came. Now, what is our tribal instinct? You should have eaten those monkeys, was what other people were saying, as a joke, of course. But I know you understand that. Those monkeys felt threatened because I was walking in the park where they were living. And they bit me, and I was traumatized. I had to go to the hospital, under COVID. I was scared, take anti-rabies shots. And I was very upset with those monkeys. Some were saying, kill all those monkeys. They're a menace. But I wonder if they are really a menace. Or is it because we humans have taken over their habitat? We humans have taken over where they lived. Those flats in Vasant Kunj were never there about 20 years ago. Now it's full. So monkeys do not have that place anymore to live. And so they become a menace, and we are fighting for space. And so they bit me. What is our responsibility in protecting other living creatures? So 3 things, Noah had to do. But as I was saying, what is happening to God's world? Think about the town or the village where you live now. Think about the birds and the animals and the insects. Are they still there? If I ask you now, I'm sure you could say, no, that animal was there when I was small. That animal was there when we were small. In Mizoram, they talk about bears, they talk about tigers and things like that. I have never known people to talk about that anymore because they simply do not exist anymore. Have animals or plants become a menace? This doesn't look good. It's a traditional tree, but it doesn't look good. And so we chop it all so that we can plant new trees that are looking beautiful to our eyes, but they don't belong there. Or sometimes in my community, I don't know about you, but I have a feeling it'll be a bit similar. When we catch something, when we see a rare bird or a rare animal, what do? Hey, catch it, catch it, catch it, and we will capture it. Or the second is kill it. Let's kill it because we want to see it. We'll preserve it. We have funny ways of preserving, and we have funny ways of trying to enjoy God's creation. Either we capture it or we kill it. Think about those animals. I'm sure your children will not even know about that or will not even remember that. What is happening to God's world? And I'm just going to show you some statistics. This was in 2018, which says that humanity, that is you and I, not somebody outside, it's you and I, have wiped out 60% of animal populations since 1970. 60% of annual populations have gone. And if you can see the biodiversity loss, it just means all the plants, the animals, the insects, the little creepy crawlies that we want to kill away. There's a massive decline, 60% of decline in wildlife populations, and 67% decline is projected by 2020, which has already happened. In our Environment Sunday sheet, there are more recent statistics, but I had these slides, so I'm showing them to you. Just see the decline, and you can name, if I ask Pudino, if I ask some of you a little bit more senior, you can name exactly which animals and birds are no longer there in your villages and towns. They're extinct. They will only be there in our textbooks and in pictures that we show to future generation. All these 1 in 4 species are at a risk of extinction. God's biodiversity. He told Noah, keep them alive. He told them, provide food. He told them to protect them, but they are dying out. They are dying out. And these are the number of species that are going extinct. Extinct means gone forever. And the main reason for biodiversity loss are habitat loss and destruction. Like I said, so many flats in Basant Kunj. I want to buy a flat. I want to buy a flat. You want to buy a flat. Dwarka is full of buildings now where some of us live. You come to Aizawl, before it used to be beautiful mountains. Now it's just a concrete jungle. It looks good only at night because you can see the lights. And everybody says, oh, Aizawl is so beautiful because you can see the lights at night. You see during the daytime, it's ugly, because it's full of buildings and buildings only. All the trees have gone. And so the birds have gone as well. The insects have gone because there are no trees. They can't feed on buildings. They can't eat buildings. They have to feed on something. And then you have overexploitation of wildlife. You have pollution, invasive species and diseases, some species becoming more, and climate change. We're not going to go into that. But these are the reasons which we are responsible for as human beings that have resulted in all of the devastation. So contrary to the job that God had given Noah and his family. Complete opposite. And of course, our beloved plastic. I'm sure Mang has told you many times about it. We've done many campaigns on plastic. Our beloved plastic. So convenient. Who wants to wash dishes? Yeah, let's use plastic plates. Who wants to bring all that cup? Yeah, let's use it, and you can throw it away. But it is also causing death for millions and millions of animals and other creatures of the earth. This is the tree cover loss. And I want to talk about Indonesia, because Indonesia, they do have trees. They do have trees, but they have the wrong trees. In our shampoos, we have what is called palm oil. Look at the ingredients in your shampoo and in other things that you use. There is an ingredient called palm oil, and these palm trees are being planted in many, many forests of Indonesia, which means the natural tree is gone. And so the orangutan, the animal, the monkey that is really big and beautiful and orangey in color, they are dying because of planting of palm trees. Palm oil trees. Now, even in my home state of Mizoram, people are planting tea and palm oil. It's very good. In Mizo we would say, "Hlok lutuk." It's very profitable because you will get the money, but you're destroying the environment. You're destroying species that depend on the indigenous trees that grow over there. And you're introducing new species of animals, new species of trees that are actually destroying habitat. Just because you plant a tree doesn't mean it's okay. You have to plant the right trees also. Here's an interesting statistic. This is 1945 in Brazil. And it's 1990. You can see the difference in the forest cover. Huge reduction. Deforestation leads to biodiversity loss. I'm not going to talk about COVID and the coronavirus and why it is there. I'm sure you've already talked about it, but that also has a link to biodiversity loss. Does this all matter to God? Okay, I'm worried, I'm scared. Now look at this, Epicure is telling us all these scary, scary things. Does it matter to God? I think it does, because I'm not going to read all of this, but in Genesis 9, God makes a covenant. You know, we talked about the covenant in Genesis 6. And then in Genesis 9, God, the 40 days and 40 nights of rain is over. And people are coming here. The ark has landed in dry land, and they have gone out. Noah and his family and all the living creatures have gone out onto dry land. And then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, he's saying, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants. Definitely. You know, it's important. God has a covenant, an agreement with Noah and human beings. Yes, I agree with that, because important people make agreements with one another. You know, if I'm going to make an agreement between Epicure and the Kuki worship service, I'm not going to ask that little girl somewhere saying, okay, let's make a covenant with you, that little girl in your church. We will have to make a covenant, an agreement with who? The chairman of KWS. Not with the young boy who is 16 years old or some unimportant person. Covenants and agreements are made between important people. And so it's obvious. God says, I'm going to make a covenant with Noah and then his descendants. But it also says, as you read on, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the animals, and all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. We would expect God to make a covenant with human beings, but here God is saying, it's not just human beings. I am making a covenant with all the living creatures. What does that mean? That it is important to God. These living creatures are also important to God. And he says, obviously, in the covenant, that never again, I will not destroy life on earth by a flood again. And it is repeated so many times in verse 12. This is the sign of the covenant I'm making between me and you and every living creature with you. A covenant for all generations to come, not only for Noah's generation, but even in your and my generation. God is making that covenant, a promise, not just to Noah and his family, but to you, to Pudino, to Mang, to everybody here, and say that I'm making this covenant with you and with all the animals. And again in verse 15, it says, I will remember my covenant between who? Me and you and all living creatures. In verse 17, repetition again. This is the sign, which is the rainbow. This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on earth. Have you ever thought about that? That God makes a covenant not only with Noah and human beings, but with all living creatures. And he repeats it again and again and again and again. That it is with Noah and all living creatures. And the sign of the rainbow is not just to human beings. We are so important. Yes, we are. But all living creatures, the mosquito that we crush, the animals that we kill, the chicken that I've had for lunch, God has made a covenant with those creatures as well. Very difficult to digest. Well, forgive the pun, but very difficult to accept, isn't it? That God would make that covenant with all living creatures, but he does. And God's plan for the world, his salvation plan, covers therefore not only the living creatures, but the whole world. And I'm sure you've heard this before. God's heart for mission is holistic in nature. God's love covers the whole world. John 3:16, it says, for God so loved the world, the cosmos. You know, some people will argue, well, if you believe in him, that's only for human beings. Okay, But God has declared his love for the whole cosmos, and his salvation plan in the story of Noah and through Jesus is for the whole world. And we need to seek the total well-being of the whole of God's creation and live in harmony with them in harmony. And the biodiversity, which means all the living creatures, the flora and fauna, the birds, the creatures, the trees, the birds, they reflect the richness and beauty of their creator. And Romans 8:21 in the New Testament, Paul says, creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay. It's not just human beings that are waiting for God to come back. It's the whole of creation that waits in eager expectation for renewal and for restoration. So you might think God's salvation plan is just for us. It is for us and for the rest of the world too. And in Colossians, it says, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him. This is through Jesus. And through Jesus, to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. The blood of Jesus that was shed on the cross was to bring reconciliation of all things, human beings included, but all things, so that all things can be renewed and restored. God is concerned about everything he has created. He's concerned about you and me, about every tribe, every nation on earth, and he's concerned about every living creature on earth as well, because God is in the business of restoration of the whole world. I'm not saying that we are equal to living creatures. We have a special place, and that special place is stewardship, of looking after. We are in that creation. We are given a special place of stewardship, of looking after, of being given that responsibility. God didn't give that responsibility to elephants or cows. He gave it to us. We have a special place, but reconciliation and restoration is for all. And so clearly in the story of Noah, the responsibilities were given to preserve, to provide, and to protect for all those living creatures. I was last month reading a manuscript about John Stott's collection, writings on creation care. And this is being edited by a person at Wheaton College. And she asked me to read the manuscript and to write a few words for it, which is going to go in the book. And so I had the privilege of reading through the whole book. Of course, I didn't read word for word because I had to do it really quickly. But it was really, really good. I enjoyed. We read John Stott's writings in many different contexts. And here is a whole collection of his writing on creation care. And I will read a little bit from that book, which I really loved. And here it says, it's possible for Christians to borrow the narrative of the secular environmental movement and merely gloss it with a bit of God language. But there are some very significant differences between secular environmentalism and a creation approach to what we would call care of creation. What does this mean? It says, there are many, many environmentalists in the world. There's the World Wildlife Fund. There are many people, secular, no religion, but they are committed to looking after creation. And sometimes we Christians also, we simply take that and just put God in between and think our work is done. No, that's not what is important. And here it ends saying this: Christians care for creation, not because they necessarily believe they are going to save the world, or because they believe that this is a flavor of the times, but simply out of their response to a loving creator. So there may be climate change, there may be global temperature rising, there may be extreme weather events, animals may go extinct. All these pandemics like COVID, which are called zoonotic diseases, because of biodiversity loss, may increase. But our response as Christians is not because we are scared. This is so scary, or because everybody is talking about it. Let's also be involved. Okay, KWS, let's do this because, everybody is talking about it. Today's World Environment Day yesterday, so let's also do it because everybody is doing it. No. And then we put God in the middle and okay, it's fine. Now it's Christian. It's not about that. Christians are to care for creation. Not because we can say, we're going to save the world, but because we are responding to a loving creator. It is our worship to a loving creator that we look after his creation. So this evening, don't get it wrong. We respond because we know that it is God who created. We respond because he gave that mandate to Noah, whom he saved, to preserve, to protect, and to provide for. And he has made a covenant with all living creatures. And we should respond to that same God and say, yes, I will look after God's creation. Not because everybody's talking about it, not because it is World Environment Day, not because our leaders have said it is Environment Sunday, but because of our response to a loving God and a loving Creator. What God created and calls very good must remain very good. Unfortunately, because of sin, it's cursed. But in God's mission of creation care, we are not given the right to choose and manage nature, but to accept and care for all that God has given to us. Therefore, what can we do? Let us repent from our sins of greed and let us live in peace with nature. Keep biodiversity alive. Let's keep all these creatures alive because God cares for each one of them as an act of worship to a loving God whose world this is. This is God's world. This is God's world. And he asks us to participate in it, in looking after it. And let us do that not because we are scared of climate change, not because we're scared our children won't see those birds, but because of our worship to a loving God who created everything. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. This is God's earth, and he's inviting you and me to participate in caring for his earth. Let's keep them alive. I know we love to eat them. I know we love to destroy them. I know we choose convenience so many times, but God is inviting you this evening to come on that journey. Not because you are an environmentalist. No one is calling you to be an environmentalist, but we're just asking that you would worship God the way we are meant to be worshiping God. Let's be children of God who care for creation, not because we're environmentalists, but because we obey God's command. May God help each one of us to be able to do that. Sometimes it's a lonely journey. Sometimes people will say, Arre, this doesn't work. But it works because this is God's work. Thank you, and God bless you in your journeys.